everybody, welcome to Book Club. I feel like I think my camera's got a bit put.
Hold on, let me. What's up?
It's got a bit put out of. Needs to come this way a little.
Way?
Yeah, and maybe a little up. Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
So?
Yeah, thank you. How are we doing today? Where did I put my phone? Goodness, this is a disaster. Here we go. Right. Yes. Hello. Welcome to Book Club. I'm just getting my Discord up so I can talk to our wonderful mod Drat. Good. Okay. Yes, welcome to Book Club. So we are reading Persuasion. Look, we've got an actual overlay that says Persuasion now. That's very exciting. Johnny made that for me this afternoon. But he can't hear me saying thank you because he's gone out of the room. But we've got that now, and we are getting into the juice of it with Persuasion. So last time we have met the Elliots. So Sir Walter Elliot, who was a baronet, who was like just like the most fancy you can get without actually having any real hereditary power. Although we do know that he's been in the House of Commons. And then we've met his oldest daughter, Elizabeth. Both Sir Walter and Elizabeth are very, very vain and consider themselves very good looking and kind of judge people that they think aren't as good looking. And we've also found out that the family is in quite a lot of debt. And Sir Walter and Elizabeth haven't really been taking that seriously at all. People who are taking that more seriously are the family friend, Lady Russell, and the second daughter, who is our protagonist, Anne. And Anne is very overlooked by Sir Walter and by Elizabeth because they do not consider her as good looking as they are, and because she is less frivolous. But she is very kind and very sensible and just an all-round good sort of person. Lady Russell adores her. They have like a surrogate mother-child kind of relationship. And Lady Russell and Anne, along with the family's lawyer, have been really, really trying to get Sir Walter and Elizabeth to realise, like, oh no, you need to change your lifestyle. And they have kind of succeeded in that they have convinced Sir Walter and Elizabeth that the thing to do would be to move to Bath and rent out their big estate. So they live currently in a big estate in the country, and instead they are going to rent that out and live in a smaller house in Bath, where they don't need to hire as many servants, and they don't necessarily need to keep a 4-horse carriage, and their house will be smaller, etc. So that's going to let them still live like a fashionable life, but for much cheaper. So one of the things that we found out from that is that the people that are interested in renting the estate, the Crofts, Admiral Croft and Mrs. Croft, they are from the Navy, and they are related to a man who used to live nearby, a Mr. Wentworth. Few people could remember his name, but Anne could remember it, Mr. Wentworth. And that didn't seem to interest Sir Walter at all, so it was brushed over. But then, later on, at the end of the chapter, Anne was like walking through the groves and being like, oh, soon he might be walking through the groves. And we didn't find out who he is. But perhaps we shall today. I mean, I know we will. We will find out. So, turns out he is just a really cute cat. Just Mr. Wentworth's really cute cat. So Mr. Wentworth, we do know, was a curate. So he was like a vicar, but he's a vicar that hasn't been through vicar school. He's been through different school. And so he gets paid a slightly different rate, and it's administered slightly differently, but it's functionally the same. So he's basically the vicar, the clergyman for the nearby area. That was who Mr. Wentworth was. And that's one of the reasons why Sir Walter was not very interested, because he was like, oh, just a vicar. That's not very fancy or fashionable at all. Okay. So, we've got a couple of chapters to read today. So I'm trying to keep an eye on the chat and on the time. But I think let's just dive right into it. Do let me know if you've got any questions. Hopefully that, like, there's not much that's been happening so far because we're only 3 chapters in, but hopefully that whole rundown made sense. Okay. Oh, what perfect timing. What perfect timing. Thank you. Got a big cup of tea. Is this French Earl Grey tea?
It is French Earl Grey.
Thank you. Yeah, any questions on the class system particularly? We're going to be hearing a lot about it in this book. Carter, this is not actually a new teacup. We have had this teacup for quite some time, but we usually use it for big coffee, like making big cappuccinos and things. Oh, it's hot. It's very hot. I'm going to leave that to cool for a moment. Right. So, Persuasion, Volume 1, Chapter 4. And if your version doesn't have volumes, it is Chapter 4. He was not Mr. Wentworth, the former curate of Monkford, however suspicious appearances may be, but a Captain Frederick Wentworth, his brother, who being made commander in consequence of the action of Santa Domingo, that'll be. Right, there is a war on right now. We've mentioned this before. It's the Napoleonic Wars. England is at war with the French. The vast majority of this takes place at sea. And Santa Domingo was the site of a big naval battle, I believe, because they were all naval battles that gave the British like a very big advantage. Like, it went very, very well for the British. So what's happened here is that Frederick Wentworth was a sailor in the Navy, obviously did something impressive or brave or important at Santo Domingo, and was promoted to a commander. That is something that we talked about last time as being only available in the Navy. In the Army, you couldn't do that. In the Army, you had to have a patron, basically. If you wanted to be an officer, you had to have someone, or if you wanted to command, you had to have a patron and pay some money and etc. It was very closed off class-wise. In the Navy, that did apply a lot of the time, but there was the possibility of being rewarded for your work with command. It was possible to work your way up. Possible, but difficult. And that was what Sir Walter... One of the reasons why Sir Walter has been making disparaging remarks about the Navy specifically. But at this time, this is set in 1815, I believe, or 1816. 1815, I think. And at the time that this is set, the British have really just it's very, very clear that they are about to win the war. And that is down to the Navy. So it had become the done thing socially to now be pro-Navy. So people who were previously very snobbish about the Navy were now, hey, that Navy, eh? Sure, they're lovely chaps. And so Sir Walter is being like a snob, but also like a little bit behind the times here. You can just see there's a few extra details in the chat there. Yeah, so like he thinks he's more in line with social mores here than he is. He is slow to lose that particular snobbery. Anyway, and while I'm still explaining things about Frederick Wentworth's career, we're about to find out that he was given the command. He was given the commanding rank as a reward, but there wasn't actually a ship available for him to command, so he had to wait like 6 months. Okay. Let's start chapter 4 again, now that that's all out of the way. He was not Mr. Wentworth, the former curate of Monkford, however suspicious appearances may be, but a Captain Frederick Wentworth, his brother, who, being made commander in consequence of the action off Santo Domingo, and not immediately employed, had come into Somersetshire in the summer of 1806, and having no parent living, found a home for half a year at Monkford. He was, at that time, a remarkably fine young man, with a great deal of intelligence, spirit, and brilliancy, and Anne, an extremely pretty girl with gentleness, modesty, taste, and feeling. Half the sum of attraction on either side might have been enough, for he had nothing to do, and she had hardly anybody to love. But the encounter of such lavish recommendations could not fail. They were gradually acquainted, and when acquainted, rapidly and deeply in love. It would be difficult to say which had seen highest perfection in the other, or which had been the happiest, she in receiving his declarations and proposals, or he in having them accepted. So they actually were engaged. A short period of exquisite felicity followed, and but a short one. Troubles soon arose. Sir Walter, on being applied to, without actually withholding his consent, or saying it should never be, gave it all the negative of great astonishment, great coldness, great silence, and a professed resolution of doing nothing for his daughter. So doing nothing for his daughter meaning he is not going to be giving any money to them. He is not going to be giving her a dowry. He is not going to be giving them an allowance. She is going to have nothing that is her own, or that is sort of kept aside for her and her children. And given that we know that Frederick Wentworth has come up kind of out of obscurity, he's unlikely to actually have anything much that can keep them, essentially, in a gentle style, like a gentlemanly style, anyway. So that for a rich baronet to say he was not going to give anything for his daughter for her marriage was quite a thing. He thought it a very degrading alliance, and Lady Russell, though with more tempered and pardonable pride, received it as a most unfortunate one. Anne Elliot, with all her claims of birth, beauty, and mind, to throw herself away at 19, involve herself at 19 in an engagement with a young man who had nothing but himself to recommend him, and no hopes of attaining affluence but in the chances of a most uncertain profession, and no connections to secure even further rise in that profession, would be indeed a throwing away which she grieved to think of. Anne Elliot, so young, known to so few, to be snatched off by a stranger without alliance or fortune, or rather sunk by him into a state of most wearing, anxious, youth-killing dependence. It must not be, if by any fair interference of friendship, any representations from one who had almost a mother's love and mother's rights, it would be prevented. Captain Wentworth had no fortune. He had been lucky in his profession, but spending freely what had come freely, had realised nothing. But he was confident that he should soon be rich, Full of life and ardour, he knew that he would soon have a ship, and soon be on a station that would lead to everything he wanted. He had always been lucky. He knew he should be so still. Such confidence, powerful in its own warmth and bewitching in the wit which often expressed it, must have been enough for Anne. But Lady Russell saw it very differently. His sanguine temper and fearlessness of mind operated very differently on her. She saw in it but an aggravation of the evil. It only added a dangerous character to himself. He was brilliant, he was headstrong. Lady Russell had little taste for wit, and of anything approaching to imprudence, a horror. She deprecated the connection in every light. Such opposition as these feelings produced was more than Anne could combat. Young and gentle as she was, it might yet have been possible to withstand her father's ill will, though unsoftened by one kind word or look on the part of her sister. But Lady Russell, whom she had always loved and relied on, could not, with such steadiness of opinion and such tenderness of manner, be continually advising her in vain. She was persuaded to believe the engagement a wrong thing. Indiscreet, improper, hardly capable of success, and not deserving it. The word persuasion or persuaded or its derivatives appears a lot in this novel, which is called Persuasion. They said the name of the book. And Jane Austen uses it in quite a lot of different meanings. We're going to get it a little bit later in this chapter with kind of different connotations. So it's worth pointing out that here Lady Russell is arguing to persuade Anne to give up the engagement. Danteum Gimsey. Oh my god, it's the title! Yeah. And thank you, Compost Witch. Yes, sanguine is like laid back and optimistic. Yeah, exactly. Sorry, I got some blanket fluff in my tea because I've got a fluffy blanket on me to keep me cozy. Yes. She was persuaded to believe the engagement a wrong thing. Indiscreet, improper, hardly capable of success, and not deserving it. But it was not merely a selfish caution under which she acted in putting an end to it. Had she not imagined herself consulting his good, even more than her own, she could hardly have given him up. The belief of being prudent and self-denying principally for his advantage was her chief consolation under the misery of a parting, a final parting. And every consolation was required, for she had to encounter all the additional pain of opinions on his side totally unconvinced and unbending, and of his feeling himself ill-used by so forced a relinquishment. He had left the country in consequence. The country here being the county, the area, but very soon after also the country. A few months had seen the beginning and the end of their acquaintance. But not with a few months ended Anne's share of suffering from it. Her attachment and regrets had for a long time clouded every enjoyment of youth, and an early loss of bloom and spirits had been their lasting effect. So we're hearing a lot about how Anne was very, very pretty and very attractive in her youth, when she was 19 and in love, but this heartbreak has caused her looks to fade, or caused her attractiveness to fade at least. Sorry, I've just checked in with the chat, and we're having some discourse about whether Lady Russell is basically doing an Emma, or whether she is very genuinely trying to protect Anne. And it's a really interesting question. Yeah, compost switch, exactly. Like, being in the Navy had many opportunities for riches and gain, particularly once you've got command of a ship, once you're a captain and above. But it also may have led to not that, and had many opportunities for dying at sea. Yeah, so I think, based on the fact that Jane Austen is writing this, we can guess whether Lady Russell was correct or not. But yeah, chat is bringing up some good points. That, like, it's not like Anne could have got a job. Right. More than 7 years were gone since this little history of sorrowful interest had reached its close, and time had softened down much, perhaps nearly all, of peculiar attachment to him. But she had been too dependent on time alone. No aid had been given in change of place, except in one visit to Bath soon after the rupture, or in any novelty or enlargement of society. So she had, like, nothing to take her mind off it, basically. No one had ever come within the Kellynch circle who could bear a comparison with Frederick Wentworth as he stood in her memory. No second attachment, the only thoroughly natural, happy, and sufficient cure at her time of life, had been possible to the nice tone of her mind. Nice meaning particular here. The fastidiousness of her taste in the small limits of the society around them. I really enjoyed that's basically just Jane Austen being like, the best way to get over someone is to get under someone. But Anne's very picky and meets basically nobody good. She had been solicited when about 22 to change her name. So that there being solicited to change her name being she'd been proposed to, by the young man who not long afterwards found a more willing mind in her younger sister. And Lady Russell had lamented her refusal, for Charles Musgrove was the eldest son of a man whose landed property and general importance were second in that country only to Sir Walter's, and of good character and appearance. So basically, he's a nice, attractive, rich man who lives nearby. Which is all Lady Russell could want for Anne. And however Lady Russell might have asked yet for something more, while Anne was 19, she would have rejoiced to see her at 22, so... 22 is old. To see her at 22, so respectably removed from the partialities and injustice of her father's house, and settled so permanently near herself. But in this case, Anne had left nothing for advice to do. And though Lady Russell, as satisfied as ever with her own discretion, never wished the past undone, she began now to have the anxiety which borders on hopelessness for Anne's being tempted, by some man of talents and independence, to enter a state for which she held her to be peculiarly fitted by her warm affections and domestic habits. That state being marriage. Basically, when Anne is 19, Lady Russell is like, she can have anyone and only the best will do for her. By the time she's 22, and it's been a few seasons, not that she's actually made it to any of the seasons, really, the seasons being like London, etc. Lady Russell's like, this nice, hot, rich guy close by will definitely do. And now that she's 27, Lady Russell is like, I don't think this woman's getting married. They knew not each other's opinion, either its constancy or its change, on the one leading point of Anne's conduct, the engagement to Frederick Wentworth and its end. For the subject was never alluded to. But Anne, at 27, thought very differently from what she had been made to think at 19. This is interesting that it says not at 7 and 20, thought very differently from what she had thought at 19, but from what she had been made to think at 19. She did not blame Lady Russell. She did not blame herself for having been guided by her, but she felt that were any young person in similar circumstances to apply to her for counsel, they would never receive any of such certain immediate wretchedness, such uncertain future good. She was persuaded that under every disadvantage of disapprobation at home, and every anxiety attending his profession, all their probable fears, delays, and disappointments, she should yet have been a happier woman in maintaining the engagement than she had been in the sacrifice of it. And this, she fully believed, had the usual share, had even more than a usual share of all such solicitudes and suspense been theirs, without reference to the actual results of their case, which, as it happened, would have bestowed earlier prosperity than could be reasonably calculated on. So basically, this is a very long sentence here. She was persuaded, meaning experience has persuaded her. So she has not been persuaded by an outside force, by an outside person. She has come to believe. She has persuaded herself. Her life has persuaded her that even with everything going against them, she would have been happier in continuing in the engagement than she has actually been in the sacrifice of it. And this, she believed. She believed that even if all the warnings had come to be true, that they wouldn't have had a lot of money, that her family would have been really angry, all of that. Even if all of that had been true, she'd still have been happier. But as it turns out, that wouldn't have been true, because all his sanguine expectations, all his confidence had been justified. His genius and ardour had seemed to foresee and to command his prosperous path. He had, very soon after their engagement ceased, got a ship. And all that he had told her would follow had taken place. He had distinguished himself, and early gained the other step in rank, and must now, by successive captures, have made a handsome fortune. So basically, he has distinguished himself as one level, and then he has now got another step up, which means that he is allowed to capture enemy ships and then claim them as his own. So he gets pretty much most of the value of everything on that ship. He gets it for his own personal property. So, and must now, by successive captures, have made a handsome fortune. Basically, like, yeah, that'll make you rich. She had only navy lists and newspapers for her authority, but she could not doubt his being rich. And in favour of his constancy, she had no reason to believe him married. How eloquent could Anne Elliot have been? How eloquent, at least, were her wishes on the side of early warm attachment and a cheerful confidence in futurity against that over-anxious caution which seems to insult exertion and distrust Providence. She had been forced into prudence in her youth. She learned romance as she grew older. The natural sequel of an unnatural beginning. I really love this sentence here. She had been forced into prudence in her youth. She learned romance as she grew older. And then the learning romance being the natural sequel of the unnatural beginning of being prudent in one's youth. With all these circumstances, recollections, and feelings, she could not hear that Captain Wentworth's sister was likely to live at Kellynch without a revival of former pain, and many a stroll and many a sigh were necessary to dispel the agitation of the idea. She often told herself it was folly before she can harden her nerves sufficiently to feel the continual discussion of the Crofts and their business no evil. She was assisted, however, by that perfect indifference and apparent unconsciousness among the only three of her friends in the secret of the past, which seemed almost to deny any recollection of it. So the three people who know about it are Lady Russell, her father, and Elizabeth, and none of them are talking about it. She could do justice to the superiority of Lady Russell's motives in this over those of her father and Elizabeth. She could honour all the better feelings of her calmness, but the general air of oblivion among them was highly important from whatever it sprung. And in the event of Admiral Croft's really taking Kellynch Hall, she rejoiced anew over the conviction which had always been most grateful to her of the past being known to those three only among her connections, by whom no syllables she believed would ever be whispered, and in the trust that among his, the brother only with whom he had been residing had received any information of their short-lived engagement. That brother had been long removed from the country, and being a sensible man, and moreover a single man at the time, she had a fond dependence on no human creature's having heard it from him. The sister, Mrs. Croft, had then been out of England, accompanying her husband on a foreign station. This is interesting. That was really unusual. Women did not usually accompany their husbands in the Navy. I love Mrs. Croft. Accompanying her husband on a foreign station, and her own sister, Mary, had been at school while it all occurred, and never admitted by the pride of some and the delicacy of others to the smallest knowledge of it afterwards. With these supports, she hoped that the acquaintance between herself and the Crofts, which, with Lady Russell still resident in Kellynch, and Mary fixed only 3 miles off, must be anticipated, need not involve any particular awkwardness. So, we have found out who he is. Frederick Wentworth. Okay, we've got some Ko-fis. We got some Ko-fis last time that didn't come through until after the stream had ended for some reason. But one was from Dante M. Hello, very happy to be here again. Thank you for this wonderful stream whilst I attempt to replace the zipper on my trousers. Toys R Us bought a Ko-fi, and 14 Carrots says, thank you for book club. And now we have some more Ko-fis. One from Dante M. Hello, I am the one repairing my trousers from last time. My zipper is not okay. I had to replace it and I pinned it wrong, so I had to redo it. I did, however, get a mini heart attack when I loaded Johnny's VOD just to hear you talking about my message. Yes, that got read out on Johnny's message, on Johnny's stream on Friday. And then I was like, that one's for book club! And we've had another we've had another Ko-fi from Karen. Hi, Sasha. I think last Monday was zipper replacement day. Not only 14 Carrots had to replace their zipper whilst listening to you, me too. My godson's carnival costume's zipper was kaput. In our region, we're in full carnival mode. Love your book club. Thank you both very much. And all of you for the Ko-fi zippers, the zipper Ko-fis. That's such a coincidence. Yes, we have a Ko-fi, and it is ko-fi.com/Johnny and Sasha. We pay our mods an equal share. So when we get Ko-fis or subscriptions, so if you subscribe with Prime, which you can do for free to one streamer a month, or if you give a Ko-fi or if you cheer bits, it all goes into a big pot, and then we split it up pirate style equally between the streamers and the mods. And sorry, I just turned my head to see Johnny bringeth the tea and taketh the Ko-fi. Yes, and it's very, very appreciated. It's very lovely when people do it. Thank you for it. And if you want to leave a little message, then I will read it out. Either I will read it out, or Johnny will eventually read it out on his Friday stream, and then I'll come running in being like, that one's for me! Right. Shall we do one more chapter? Ooh, there's an illustration coming up in this one. I'm not going to look at it ahead of time. I'm going to wait and we can all look at it together. Chapter 5. On the morning appointed for Admiral and Mrs. Croft's seeing Kellynch Hall, Anne found it most natural to take her almost daily walk to Lady Russell's and keep out of the way till all was over, when she found it most natural to be sorry that she had missed the opportunity of seeing them. This meeting of the two parties proved highly satisfactory, and decided the whole business at once. Each lady was previously well disposed for an agreement, and saw nothing therefore but good manners in the other. And with regard to the gentlemen, there was such a hearty good humour, such an open, trusting liberality on the Admiral's side, as could not but influence Sir Walter, who had besides been flattered into his very best and most polished behaviour by Mr. Shepherd's assurances of his being known by report to the Admiral as a model of good breeding. I love the way Mr. Shepherd manages Sir Walter there. The house and grounds and furniture were approved, the crofts were approved, terms, time, everything and everybody was right, and Mr. Shepherd's clerks were set to work, without there having been a single preliminary difference to modify of all that this indenture showeth, which is just some preamble at the start of contracts. Sir Walter, without hesitation, declared the Admiral to be the best-looking sailor he had ever met with, and went so far as to say that, if his own man might have had the arranging of his hair, he should not be ashamed of being seen with him anywhere. I love these little backhand compliments that they give to each other. So Sir Walter being like, if my guy did the Admiral's hair, I wouldn't be ashamed of being seen with him. And the Admiral, with sympathetic cordiality, observed to his wife as they drove back through the park, "I thought we should soon come to a deal, my dear, in spite of what they told us at Taunton. The Baronet will never set the Thames on fire, but there seems no harm in him. Reciprocal compliments which would have been esteemed about equal." The Crofts were to have possession at Michaelmas. Michaelmas is to the 29th of September, I think. It's late September, and it's something that used to be marked but isn't really marked now. And as Sir Walter proposed removing to Bath in the course of the preceding month, there was no time to be lost in making every dependent arrangement. Lady Russell, convinced that Anne would not be allowed to be of any use or any importance in the choice of the house which they were going to secure, was very unwilling to have her hurried away so soon, and wanted to make it possible for her to stay behind, till she might convey her to Bath herself after Christmas. But having engagements of her own which must take her from Kellynch for several weeks, she was unable to give the full invitation she wished, and Anne, though dreading the possible heats of September in all the white glare of Bath, and grieving to forego all the influence so sweet and so sad of the autumnal months in the country, did not think that, everything considered, she wished to remain. It would be most right and most wise, and therefore must involve least suffering, to go with the others. Something occurred, however, to give her a different duty. Mary, often a little unwell, and always thinking a great deal of her own complaints, and always in the habit of claiming Anne when anything was the matter, was indisposed, and foreseeing that she should not have a day's health all the autumn, entreated, or rather required her, for it was hardly entreaty, to come to Uppercross Cottage, and bear her company as long as she should want her, instead of going to Bath. "I cannot possibly do without Anne," was Mary's reasoning, and Elizabeth's reply was, "Then I am sure Anne had better stay, for nobody will want her in Bath." To be claimed as a good, though in an improper style, is at least better than being rejected as no good at all, and Anne, glad to be thought of some use, glad to have anything marked out as a duty, and certainly not sorry to have the scene of it in the country, and her own dear country, readily agreed to stay. This invitation of Mary's removed all Lady Russell's difficulties, and it was consequently soon settled that Anne should not go to Bath till Lady Russell took her, and that all the intervening time should be divided between Uppercross Cottage and Kellynch Lodge. Uppercross Cottage is where Mary lives, Kellynch Lodge is where Lady Russell lives. So far all was perfectly right, but Lady Russell was almost startled by the wrong of one part of the Kellynch Hall plan when it burst on her, which was Mrs. Clay's being engaged to go to Bath with Sir Walter and Elizabeth as a most important and valuable assistant to the latter in all the business before her. So we've met Mrs. Clay before. She is Mr. Shepherd's previously married daughter who has come home after a a marriage that did not pan out and did not do well for her financially. Presumably her husband has died, with 2 young boys. Yes, so she is going to Bath. Lady Russell was extremely sorry that such a measure should have been resorted to at all, wondered, grieved, and feared, and the affront it contained to Anne, in Mrs. Clay's being of so much use, while Anne could be of none, was a very sore aggravation. Anne herself was become hardened to such affronts, but she felt the imprudence of the arrangement quite as keenly as Lady Russell. With a great deal of quiet observation, and a knowledge which she often wished less of her father's character, she was sensible that results the most serious to his family from the intimacy were more than possible. She's talking about he might get seduced. Mrs. Clay might seduce him and he might marry her. She did not imagine that her father had at present an idea of the kind. Mrs. Clay had freckles, and a projecting tooth, and a clumsy wrist, which he was continually making severe remarks upon in her absence. Freckles at the time were considered unattractive. But she was young, and certainly altogether well-looking, and possessed in an acute mind and assiduous pleasing manners infinitely more dangerous attractions than any merely personal might have been. Anne was so impressed by the degree of their danger that she could not excuse herself from trying to make it perceptible to her sister. She had little hope of success, but Elizabeth, who in the event of such a reverse would be so much more to be pitied than herself, should never, she thought, have reason to reproach her for giving no warning. So the reason that it would be bad for Sir Walter to marry Mrs. Clay, the reasons are, number 1, right now, Elizabeth is the head of the household in terms of, like, she's the mistress of the household. She's in charge of the things that women are allowed to be in charge of. And she is afforded certain considerations by society. She is important socially. If there was a new Lady Elliot, that would not be the case. She would be relegated to just someone's daughter again. Secondly, it is likely that Sir Walter would have more kids, maybe a boy. And that would mean that Mary, Anne, and Elizabeth, they're like whatever they have that is available to them as inheritance would be up in the air. Like, we don't know exactly what the financial situation is, but it would potentially be very bad for them given that Elizabeth and Anne are not married and they are 27 and 29 respectively. So the chances of them getting married are slim at this point. Viola Katzen, yes, exactly. Elizabeth is the Emma of this house. Yes. But she is worse than Emma, and she is also 29. So whereas Emma was like, I don't want to get married, Elizabeth is like, I'm probably like, she seems to think she can still get married, but realistically she's probably not going to. Right. So Anne is like, Elizabeth's not going to listen, but I need to, like, warn her. She spoke and seemed only to offend. Elizabeth could not conceive how such an absurd suspicion should occur to her, and indignantly answered for each party's perfectly knowing their situation. Mrs. Clay, said she warmly, never forgets who she is, and I am rather better acquainted with her sentiments than you can be. I can assure you that upon the subject of marriage they are particularly nice. Again, sort of fastidious, particular. And that she reprobates all inequality of condition and rank more strongly than most people. And as to my father, I really should not have thought that he, who has kept himself single so long for our sakes, need be suspected now. If Mrs. Clay were a very beautiful woman, I grant you, it might be wrong to have her so much with me. Not that anything in the world, I am sure, would induce my father to make a degrading match. But he might be rendered unhappy. But poor Mrs. Clay, who, with all her merits, can never have been reckoned tolerably pretty. I really think poor Mrs. Clay may be staying here in perfect safety. One would imagine you had never heard my father speak of her personal misfortunes, though I know you must 50 times. That tooth of hers, and those freckles. Freckles do not disgust me so very much as they do him. I have known a face not materially disfigured by a few, but he abominates them. You must have heard him notice Mrs. Clay's freckles. There is hardly any personal defect, replied Anne, which an agreeable manner might not gradually reconcile one to. I think very differently, answered Elizabeth shortly. An agreeable manner may set off handsome features, but can never alter plain ones. However, at any rate, as I have a great deal more at stake on this point than anybody else can have, I think it rather unnecessary in you to be advising me. Anne had done, glad that it was over, and not absolutely hopeless of doing good. Elizabeth, though resenting the suspicion, might yet be made observant by it. I'm going to show the picture here. We've got some illustration. This is of, I believe this is of Anne and Lady Russell leaving Kellynch Hall. The last office of the 4 carriage horses was to draw Sir Walter, Miss Elliot, and Mrs. Clay to Bath. So that's an indication that they are giving up their carriage and their 4 horses, when they get to Bath. The party drove off in very good spirits. Sir Walter prepared with condescending bows for all the afflicted tenantry and cottagers who might have had a hint to show themselves. This is a lovely little ironic line, basically saying that his tenants and cottagers and things that have lived on his estate and worked the land, someone, probably Mr. Shepherd, has been like, just a hint, you should probably go and stand outside your house and wave off Sir Walter so that he can condescendingly bow to them. And Anne walked up at the same time in a sort of desolate tranquillity to the lodge where she was to spend the first week. Her friend was not in better spirits than herself. Lady Russell felt this break-up of the family exceedingly. Their respectability was as dear to her as her own, and a daily intercourse had become precious by habit. It was painful to look upon their deserted grounds, and still worse to anticipate the new hands they were to fall into, and to escape the solitariness and the melancholy of so altered a village, and be out of the way when Admiral and Mrs. Croft first arrived. She had determined to make her own absence from home begin when she must give up Anne. Accordingly, their removal was made together, and Anne was set down at Uppercross Cottage in the first stage of Lady Russell's journey. So she's now going to see Mary. Uppercross was a moderate-sized village, which a few years back had been completed in the old English style, containing only 2 houses superior in appearance to those of the yeomen and labourers. The mansion of the squire, with its high walls, great gates, and old trees, substantial and unmodernised. A compact, tight parsonage, enclosed in its own neat garden, with a vine and a pear tree trained round its casements. But on the marriage of the young squire, it had received the improvement of a farmhouse elevated into a cottage for his residence. And Uppercross Cottage, with its verandah, French windows, and other prettinesses, was quite as likely to catch the traveller's eye as the more consistent and considerable aspect and premises of the great house about a quarter of a mile further on. So we've got here this little village, which Jane Austen is describing as quite idyllic. From her point of view, this is quite idyllic. Most of the houses are like labourers, agricultural workers, and the like labouring upper working class houses. And then there's a big mansion for the squire, the guy who owns most of the land. And then there's a parsonage for whoever he decides is the vicar for that area to live in. And then when he got married, the landowner, he and his wife built a big farmhouse / cottage, like a lovely house that's not quite as big and fancy as the big house, but is still very lovely. And that is where Charles Musgrove and Mary Musgrove live with their children. It's about a quarter of a mile away from his father's house, and he is the firstborn son, so he is the heir to the big house. Yes, Dante Ginsey, is there a reason that these VODs don't get uploaded to YouTube? Yes, there is. The reason is I have ADHD and I'm forgetful, and I always intend to upload the VODs to YouTube, but inevitably I miss some. And this is a kind of stream where I have always traditionally felt like you kind of need them all, or there's no point doing any of them. But so far, with Persuasion, I have actually uploaded the first 2 VODs to YouTube. I just haven't put them public yet. But I have actually exported them, and they are currently just private. And if I remember to do that for the next several weeks, then I will be making them live, and they will be on YouTube. But it is dependent on me remembering. Yes, thank you, Drut, also for the Ko-fi plug, ko-fi.com/Johnny and Sasha. Maybe you can give a Ko-fi to remind me to export these videos to YouTube. Not you, Dante M. Gimsey, you've already given one. I just mean the universal you. But yes, I am very, very much trying to do it this time with Persuasion. Okay, where were we up to? I have been explaining about Uppercross Cottage. Uppercross Cottage. Here Anne had often been staying. She knew the ways of Uppercross as well as those of Kellynch. The 2 families were so continually meeting, so much in the habit of running in and out of each other's house at all hours, that it was rather a surprise to her to find Mary alone. But being alone, her being unwell and out of spirits, was almost a matter of course. Though better endowed than the elder sister, Mary had not Anne's understanding or temper. While well and happy and properly attended to, she had great good humour and excellent spirits. But any indisposition sunk her completely. She had no resources for solitude, and inheriting a considerable share of the Elliot self-importance, was very prone to add to every other distress that of fancying herself neglected and ill-used. In person, she was inferior to both sisters, being like in appearance. She was inferior to both sisters, and had, even in her bloom, only reached the dignity of being a fine girl. She was now lying on the faded sofa of the pretty little drawing-room, the once elegant furniture of which had been gradually growing shabby, under the influence of 4 summers and 2 children, and on Anne's appearing, greeted her with, "So you are come at last! I began to think I should never see you. I am so ill I can hardly speak. I have not seen a creature the whole morning." "I am sorry to find you unwell," replied Anne. "You sent me such a good account of yourself on Thursday." "Yes, I made the best of it. I always do. But I was very far from well at the time, and I do not think I ever was so ill in my life as I have been all this morning. Very unfit to be left alone, I am sure. Suppose I were to be seized of a sudden in some dreadful way, and not able to ring the bell. So Lady Russell would not get out. I do not think she has been in this house 3 times this summer." Anne said what was proper, and inquired after her husband. "Oh, Charles is out shooting. I have not seen him since 7 o'clock. He would go, though I told him how ill I was. He said he should not stay out long, but he has never come back, and now it is almost 1. I assure you I have not seen a soul this whole long morning." "You have had your little boys with you?" "Yes, as long as I could bear their noise, but they are so unmanageable that they do me more harm than good. Little Charles does not mind a word I say, and Walter is grown quite as bad." "Well, you will soon be better now," replied Anne cheerfully. "You know I always cure you when I come. How are your neighbours at the great house?" "I can give you no account of them. I have not seen one of them today, except Mr. Musgrove, who just stopped and spoke through the window, but without getting off his horse." I love this, that, like, Mary's complaint is like, "I haven't seen anybody all morning. I've been left completely alone." And in that time, we find out that she has had her little boys, but sent them away. And that she has been visited by Mr. Musgrove. And I think that we might find out that I've forgotten now. I just read this like 2 hours ago. I think that might actually be it. And though I told him how ill I was, not one of them have been near me. It did not happen to suit the Miss Musgroves, I suppose, and they never put themselves out of their way. You will see them yet, perhaps, before the morning is gone. It is early. I never want them, I assure you. They talk and laugh a great deal too much for me. Oh, Anne, I am so very unwell. It was quite unkind of you not to come on Thursday." "My dear Mary, recollect what a comfortable account you sent me of yourself. You wrote in the cheerfullest manner and said you were perfectly well and in no hurry for me. And that being the case, you must be aware that my wish would be to remain with Lady Russell to the last. And besides what I felt on her account, I have really been so busy, have had so much to do, that I could not very conveniently have left Kellynch sooner." "Dear me, what can you possibly have to do?" "A great many things, I assure you. More than I can recollect in a moment, but I can tell you some. I've been making a duplicate of the catalogue of my father's books and pictures. I've been several times in the garden with Mackenzie trying to understand, and make him understand, which of Elizabeth's plants are for Lady Russell. I have had all my own little concerns to arrange, books and music to divide, and all my trunks to repack, from not having understood in time what was intended as to the waggons. And one thing I have had to do, Mary, of a more trying nature, going to almost every house in the parish as a sort of take leave. I was told that they wished it. But all these things took up a great deal of time." "Oh, well," and after a moment's pause, "but you have never asked me one word about our dinner at the Pools yesterday." "Did you go, then? I have made no inquiries, because I concluded that you must have been obliged to give up the party." "Oh, yes, I went. I was very well yesterday. Nothing at all the matter with me till this morning. It would have been strange if I had not gone." "I am very glad you were well enough, and I hope you had a pleasant party." "Nothing remarkable. One always knows beforehand what the dinner will be and who will be there, and it is so very uncomfortable not having a carriage of one's own. Mr. and Mrs. Musgrove took me, and we were so crowded. They are both so very large and take up so much room, and Mr. Musgrove always sits forwards. So there was I, crowded into the back seat with Henrietta and Louisa, and I think it very likely that my illness today may be owing to it." A little further perseverance in patience and forced cheerfulness on Anne's side produced nearly a cure on Mary's. She could soon sit upright on the sofa, and began to hope she might be able to leave it by dinner time. Then, forgetting to think of it, she was at the other end of the room, beautifying a nosegay. Then she ate her cold meat, and then she was well enough to propose a little walk. "Where shall we go?" said she, when they were ready. "I suppose you will not like to call at the great house before they have been to see you." "I have not the smallest objection on that account," replied Anne. "I should never think of standing on such ceremony with people I know so well as Mrs. and the Miss Musgroves." "Oh, but they ought to call upon you as soon as possible. They ought to feel what is due to you as my sister. However, we may as well go and sit with them a little while, and when we have got that over, we can enjoy our walk." Anne had always thought such a style of intercourse highly imprudent, but she had ceased to endeavour to check it, from believing that there were on each side continual subjects of offence. Neither family could now do without it. The manner of intercourse being the two families, the big Musgroves and the little Musgroves, are always in and out of each other's houses, even though they are constantly annoying each other. But they are clearly also very close with it. Like, it's real family hours at the Musgroves. To the great house accordingly they went, to sit the full half hour in the old-fashioned square parlour, with a small carpet and shining floor, to which the present daughters of the house were gradually giving the proper air of confusion by a grand pianoforte and a harp, flower-stands, and little tables placed in every direction. This half-hour thing, we've had a couple of references to the fact that like it was considered in the like formal social standards of the day. The polite thing would be for the Musgroves to come and visit Anne because she's just arrived, so they would call on her first before she goes to call on them. But because they're very close, Anne's like, I don't think that matters. But the full half hour is like the appropriate time for a morning visit, essentially. That's like the socially dictated amount of time. You go to the house, you sit there for half an hour, they serve you tea, and then you leave. And I think that's actually a lovely idea. Unless you're very close, in which case you might end up chatting and staying longer, but that's like after half an hour is the socially accepted time to get up and go. Yes, so they're in this like formal room, but the Miss Musgroves, the young women, they're playing piano, they're playing a harp, they're arranging flowers, they're decorating little tables, etc. Oh, could the originals of the portraits against the wainscot, could the gentlemen in brown velvet and the ladies in blue satin have seen what was going on, have been conscious of such an overthrow of all order and neatness. The portraits themselves seemed to be staring in astonishment. So those are the people who would have built the house in all its formality, while the Musgroves are like making it very busy with all their hobbies. The Musgroves, like their houses, were in a state of alteration, perhaps of improvement. The father and mother were in the old English style, and the young people in the new. Mr. and Mrs. Musgrove were a very good sort of people, friendly and hospitable, not much educated, and not at all elegant. Their children had more modern minds and manners. There was a numerous family, but the only two grown up, excepting Charles, were Henrietta and Louisa, young ladies of 19 and 20, who had brought from a school at Exeter all the usual stock of accomplishments, and were now, like thousands of other young ladies, living to be fashionable, happy, and merry. Their dress had every advantage, their faces were rather pretty, their spirits extremely good, their manners unembarrassed and pleasant. They were of consequence at home and favourites abroad. Anne always contemplated them as some of the happiest creatures of her acquaintance. But still, saved as we all are by some comfortable feeling of superiority from wishing for the possibility of exchange, she would not have given up her own more elegant and cultivated mind for all their enjoyments, and envied them nothing but that seemingly perfect good understanding and agreement together, that good-humoured mutual affection, of which she had known so little herself with either of her sisters. They were received with great cordiality. Nothing seemed amiss on the side of the great house family, which was generally, as Anne very well knew, the least to blame. The half hour was chatted away pleasantly enough, and she was not at all surprised at the end of it to have their walking party joined by both the Miss Musgroves at Mary's particular invitation. So, that is the book for today. So, we've had another Ko-fi from Moreware. First time I've been able to make it to Book Club Live. Thank you for doing it. It's a lovely way to spend a Monday evening. Thank you very much. I also think it's a lovely way to spend a Monday evening. I really love doing book club. So we will leave the Elliots there, and we are going to be raiding Drut, actually. So thank you very much to everybody who has dropped Ko-fi, and to Drut, as always, for modding. You can see Johnny streaming on Friday. You can see the both of us streaming on Sunday at the MacGuffin channel. And then I'll be back next week. And in the meantime, we will be raiding Drut. What will our raid phrase be? You're playing Morningstar Descent to Deadrock. Ooh, a sci-fi point and click. I've not heard of that game, but it sounds fun. Yeah, thank you very much, everybody, for joining me and for making your comments on the book. What is our raid phrase? I feel like it should be... We've got so many lovely, lovely quotes this time. I think, these, like, insults that Sir Walter Elliot and the Admiral gave each other. So I'm going to say the Baronet will never set the Thames on fire is our raid phrase. Oh, we've already had Freckle. Oh, of no use. Yeah, no, that's a way better one. Yeah, Drut of no use. Drut, you can't suggest your own raid. You can't suggest the raid phrase to raid you. But you have, so that will be it. It will be of no use. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. What a lovely time this has been. And I hope that you have enjoyed it. And I shall see you or be seen by you another time. Okay. Bye.